Ever wonder what it takes to become a published author? Well, then you're in luck, because today I sat down with New York Times bestselling author Stephen Rowley. The mind behind Lily and the Octopus, The Grunkle, and so many more. His books have been published in 20 languages and are even in development for TV shows and film. From heartbreak to humor, Stephen's stories have touched millions. So what are you waiting for? Come on, let's go. What usually sparks a story idea for you? Is it a character, a scene, or a theme?
I want to say it's always something a little bit different, but I was thinking about this, and I'll use my novel *The Grunkle* as an example, because that's probably what I'm best known for. Oftentimes, it starts with an intellectual question. I loved the anti-meme novels by Patrick Dennis from the 1950s. And I was thinking about the author Patrick Dennis, who came out later in life, and other sort of mid-century queer writers like Tennessee Williams, who wrote these sort of larger-than-life female characters, perhaps as stand-ins for gay men, which they would not have been able to write openly about at the time, or if they did, they certainly wouldn't have found the levels of success that they had. So I thought, well, what if we could reclaim one of these characters, and make the anti-meme character a gay man today? Would that be interesting? But then it couples with kind of an emotional exploration, and when you're writing a book, life doesn't stop. And early on in writing *The Grunkle*, I lost one of my best friends from college to breast cancer, and she left behind a 6-year-old son. And suddenly I was realizing, that I had a responsibility to tackle grief, particularly grief in children in a new way. And the anti-meme novels, which I love, but, she sends her nephew, who she inherits, to boarding school after the death of his parents. And it sort of sidesteps that issue of grief. And suddenly, I'm thinking about this young boy, and, what are the responsibilities about those around him and in his extended community to remind him, how much he was fiercely loved. And, in a book that's a comedy, that these might sound like strange things, an intellectual approach, or a deep exploration of grief. How can the book still be funny? But I think, hopefully it's to the book's betterment that there are some deep questions sort of simmering under the surface, even behind the jokes, that there's sort of a deeper exploration of the human condition.
Oh, I love that. And I think, sometimes, I don't know about you personally, but for me, I know when my life is falling apart and it's being, maybe it's a little deeper, maybe it's a little darker. That's typically when the funniest things do happen. There's kind of a humor in darkness sometimes, and in those deep moments. And I think you just write that so beautifully, and it really captures what everyone goes through and what we feel. So I love that about your writing personally.
Absolutely. I think, comedy for me has truly always been the way through. It's been a salvation, through all the, loss that I've experienced in life, and some darker times, having a sense of humor is truly been a saving grace. And listen, it doesn't mean that sometimes that humor isn't dark, on some days, or that it can be very, pointed inward, self-depreciating. So the jokes kind of can change from day to day, but the ability to laugh, particularly at oneself, I think has always been something that I have treasured.
I love that. I think that's where just some of the most beautiful writing does come from, is being able to laugh at yourself. I'm a debut author myself, and some of the funny things is, letting my dad read my work for the very first time, and him taking a red pen, and I think he scratched the whole page out one time. And I was okay.
Dad.
Wow, okay then. But it was that kind of moment of you kind of had to laugh at yourself, because he was so right on things, and I was like, okay, fine. I'll just go back to my room and cry for a minute, but it's fine.
Well, we've all heard the expression, all writers have heard the expression, sort of kill your darlings. It's really hard to kill your darlings. And I think that is never more true than when writing humor too. A joke sometimes is the hardest thing to take out. Particularly if we know that it's funny or it's going to land in a specific way. But like anything, sometimes it can get in the way of the plot moving forward, or a character development in a way. And so, finding that balance is key.
Very true. Even if I want to live out my Chandler Bing, moment.
I know. Listen, I do too. And I have them all cut and saved into a different, into a different document. And maybe I'll be able to revisit some of these great jokes, or maybe years from now, I'll look at them and be like, oh God, I guess we cut that for a reason.
How has your writing process evolved from your first novel to your last work?
My first novel was a book called Lily and the Octopus. And I got to say, with debuts in particular, there's a great luxury to them in that, you're kind of writing it just for yourself. And you may have a dream that it will be published, or this is the book that will get you an agent, or get you a publishing deal, or hit the bestseller list. But while you're toiling on it, it is kind of yours and yours alone. And there's a great joy and freedom to that, and then suddenly, you get published. And Lily was a book that debuted with a splash. It was a bestseller and translated in 20 languages, and the movie rights sold, although still no movie. But it was just one of these things that then suddenly there was this pressure about what to do next. And so I don't know. I want to say my writing process has changed, but also I try to fight against some of that change. Like, I always want to try to keep looking for that joy in the work, even when I have a deadline now, or the pressure of sort of one-upping my previous book, or that I feel expectations from my readership about what they want. I try to keep that initial joy of writing for oneself, because I think that's where great art can come from. Which isn't to say I haven't learned anything about process and what works and what doesn't work. But I almost want to flip that question around and say the thing that I, instead of like, how have I grown? How do I try to stay the same? And how do I keep that sort of hungry writer in me inspired?
I like that. How do you basically keep the kind of the light on a little bit when it comes to writing?
Yeah, and finding the joy in it, because it does become a business, right? Suddenly, I have 5 novels out, and I'm almost completed my 6, and then there have been several more along the way that are sitting in a drawer, and for good reason. But each one is its own beast in a way, and you kind of have to approach it slightly differently. I took a year off from actively drafting a novel, which isn't to say I wasn't working, but different projects and some of these film adaptations I'm trying to get off the ground, et cetera, et cetera. But I came back to it and I was like, wait a minute, I forgot how to do this. I think, there is something about the inertia of writing sometimes that, when you take a couple days off even, you can, it's hard to sort of find your voice again or get back on track. But so I'm always trying to write now, even if it's not towards a novel, like, even journaling or something, just to keep those muscles warm. And then I think the other thing that's really interesting that just occurred to me, for the first time, I narrated my own audiobooks for The Guncle and The Guncle Abroad. And which is something I don't know that the publisher thought was going to be a great idea. So I had to audition. I had to record myself and send it in, and then sit back and hope, I hope I got the part. But since doing that, I realized, like, you hear your own work so differently when you read it out loud. Mm-hmm. So even when I'm not recording the audiobook, and I don't know that I would or should for all of my future titles, but reading my work out loud is now forever part of my process. And it's something I've really learned. If you're writing on the screen, print out a draft and look at it on paper. You'll see it in a whole different way. And when you've printed it on paper, read it out loud and you'll see it in a whole new way again. And it really sort of is eye-opening sometimes about some things that are going really well, about some of your strengths, and also, conversely, some of your weak spots that, you might not have noticed just scrolling through on a computer screen.
I can testify to that. I made, I'm very old fashioned. I like to print everything out. I need to see it. I need to be able to write notes on it, and, on the side and the corners and all different colors. And it looks like a giant little art project by the end of it. And I personally, I make my poor 70-year-old dad read every single book of mine out loud, word for word, downstairs. Because, for me personally being dyslexic, I can't always read it so well. Yep. hearing him, he's a beautiful reader. And so I make him read everything out loud to me. My mom sits on the couch. It's a big family event. And we take our pens, we each have a copy, and we sit there and we're like, okay, that didn't sound right, or that didn't feel natural. Like, I don't think a character would actually say this in real life.
Yeah.
A lot of times he's like, come on, you just put that in there to move that forward. I'm like, yeah, I did.
I love that. It's like you have your own little company of players.
I do. I really
Almost.
do.
And that is particularly helpful, when you mention dialogue. I think, hearing it said out loud is so crucial. We don't need to name names or call anybody out, but we've all read a book where we think the dialogue just falls a little flat, and you think, like, do you not listen to how people speak? But I think, that's a very special skill, being able to write prose and then shift into dialogue and have it sound very natural sounding. You never want it to sound too flowery or artful, perhaps like the narration, but when you get into dialogue, and then to make dialogue sound different for each character that is speaking is a real skill, and we've certainly read those where it just feels like every character is talking with the authorial voice and maybe not the way inherently that person would speak if you knew them in real life. And so hearing it out loud, I think, is a crucial part of my process now, and I think that's a good example as to why.
Yes, I think every new writer getting into writing needs to do that for themselves. Have somebody, or like even do like almost like you're doing like a play with somebody. Like, you take a character, I'll take a character, and if you guys both sound the same, then something's a little iffy. You got to go change it up a little bit. So 100%.
Exactly. And it's something that's so helpful with, having a writer's group or attending a writer's conference or something, to have other writers to be able to look at your work too is very helpful. And I love that your parents are involved. I would say, in having a writer's group or other people look at your work, it's important to have people who you trust to tell you what you need to hear and not just what you want to hear. But it sounds like your dad's got that down with his red pen, and
yeah, he can tell me a little bit more what I want sometimes. But
yeah, exactly. If anything, I was like, Dad, I have feelings. Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a specific routine or environment that helps you write?
Yeah, well, I'm talking to you from my office now. It's the first time I've ever had an office. We moved into a new home about a year ago, and I've been building this space with mementos from my career, and it is really lovely to have kind of a home base now in which to work, where I write on a laptop mostly, and I used to move around the house quite a bit depending on where the sun was during the day, like a cat. Yeah. But to have a sort of a home base and room to sort of spread out and keep all my notes and whatnot, I've found has been very helpful. I've never been one to write in coffee shops or in public. I'm jealous of people who can, but I just get too sucked into other people's conversations and my surroundings. I'm sensitive if it's sitting under an air conditioning vent or, the music is too loud. But mostly, even, I'll put headphones in if I'm in public, but sometimes I'm not playing anything, and it's because it allows me to sort of eavesdrop on other people without them suspecting it. So yeah, I often get too caught up in, other people's, in a surrounding outdoor. So I try to write at home. But yeah, it's one thing that, COVID was so difficult, I think, for writers, because suddenly we had all this time for the output, because I think of it as an input output kind of business, right? We had all this time for the output, but it was that year, when we're sheltering at home or whatnot, where the input was so, it was so hard to refill those coffers in a way, because we weren't out observing people in the same way, or, when we were, they were sort of hidden behind masks, and it's hard to, it's hard to sort of like observe, all these wonderful, quirky little details that writers might put into a book that might not necessarily be a main plot point, but that makes it feel so textured and layered and crackling with life.
Exactly. The soul of writing. It was very hard to find that during COVID.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, a lot of us are still sort of struggling with that a little bit, and then struggling about how to address it, in a certain way. I wonder if we'll, if we're in for a sort of spate of COVID novels to come, or what we want to, what we will want to write about that time.
Yeah. Be very interesting. I know for me personally, I binged the entire season of Supernatural in 2 months, which was very concerning. 16 seasons with my parents.
Wow.
So it's very concerning what I chose to do with my time. So I hope other people were way more productive. Um, but I definitely connect with what you're saying about coffee shops. I have like extreme ADHD. I'm like, I'm way too excited to hear what the person next to me is doing.
Yeah,
I
me
was in
too.
I was in a coffee shop the other day, and there was this couple next to me, and they had the craziest story. I started taking notes. I was like, I completely forgot what I was doing. Like they
Yeah.
were way more interesting than what I was writing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you'll never know like when that that might inspire something that goes
True.
into a future story. So it's not all wasted time, but it's hard when you're on a deadline and you're like, okay, I've got to
Yes,
focus. The irony though is I love coffee, but I just have to make it for myself at home.
me too. Your books often blend humor and heartache so beautifully. How do you strike that balance?
Oh goodness, I think you've cut really right to the heart of what I do, or what I, certainly try to do with my books, because they're all, sort of funny books about hard topics, I think. And it is striking that balance, which I think is crucial to their success. I think oftentimes, like, I err in my early drafts on going one or two jokes too far. And when you do that, it can really sort of deflate the emotion from a scene, or undercut the seriousness of what you're trying to say. But conversely, if you go too long or it gets too dark without inserting a joke or a moment of levity, you need those moments to give your reader the opportunity to just take a breath, with a laugh too. And I try to think of that old adage by, is it Coco Chanel, who said, before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take off one accessory, like, because you probably have one too many on. I do that with jokes. That's the last thing I do, with a draft. I'll go through and really just, try to be like strict with, I've got to cut at least one here. And I generally sort of find that works. Because sometimes you can be so enamored with a joke. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but say the setup takes too long, to get to a punchline, and then you realize you've sort of wasted half a page, or it's a great joke, but maybe not the one that character would tell.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think about, books, you hope, having, a book, you want it to have a long lifespan, a long shelf life. And so it's very different from, say, writing a Tonight Show monologue, which can be very topical, or the news of the day, right? It's got to be, the humor has to be a little bit more timeless, I feel. And it really, at least for me, it has to be rooted in character. And that way, then hopefully it doesn't feel dated by the time, a book hits the shelves, or 10, 15, 20, or, years from now, or beyond. And so, really, I think finding the balance is what, is at the heart of what I try to do. And it's, it's my secret 11 herbs and spices, or whatever. It's my secret recipe, but I work very hard at it.
Well, you do amazing at it. So I'm in awe at your writing always.
Oh, thank you.
How do you handle creative doubt or writer's block when it shows up?
Yeah, I think, the voices in our head, or maybe I should just speak to me. The voices in my head, that speak to sort of self-doubt, are loud, and they are persistent. And in many ways, it's the writer's job to quiet them the best we can. I don't know if we can ever fully silence them, but I'm sort of amazed that even five books in, and I've had all this lovely success that I could never have envisioned at the outset. And and I'm someone who came to this a little bit later in life. I didn't publish my first novel until I was 45. And so I was hoping that, that with that, it's very different than, say, maybe coming out of the Iowa Writers Workshop and making a splashy debut at 25. I was hoping with some of that, age and life experience that would also come confidence. But I think it's just part of being an artist. It's part of being a creative soul is to wrestle with self-doubt and imposter syndrome, which I still have to this day. I love when people ask me to come talk or give the keynote at their writers conference or teach a course, and I'm like, me? Like, what wisdom do I have to impart? And I have to like, oh no, wait, you do have valuable experience, and you have something to say, and I think like we all just need to find our confidence. I think for me personally, having dogs helps. I love dogs. I have 2 dogs. Writing can feel like a very solitary endeavor, and even having their company around as I work is calming to me. But also the fact that they want you to get up and play or walk them or get up and move. It's a very solitary endeavor, as I said, but it's also a very sedentary occupation, writing. And getting up out of the chair, moving your body is so crucial for me. And I can things can feel so dire, and I'll get up and and take the dogs for a long walk, and I'll come back and everything will seem fresh and full of possibility again. And so there are simple ways that I combat that, but usually it's stepping away and coming back. And I've always been amazed at life's ability to throw at you what you need to know in the moment that you need to know it, And so it may be that I'm going for a walk and I'm listening to a podcast or something, or I'm listening to an audiobook, and it triggers some idea, or it gives me some little nugget that solves the question that I was trying to answer, where sitting there and staring at the computer for hours would have not brought the same resolution.
Absolutely. Those little creative brain breaks that when you're not thinking, oh, I have to finish this, I have to do this, and you just allow your mind to just kind of wander for a little bit. And I like what you touched on, like it is such a sedentary job. And so getting up and moving for a second, I don't know what it does, but like the dopamine in your brain, just for that little second, it's going to recharge everything, and you'll go, wait, oh, there it was. That's what I was looking for. And dogs, yes. Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with dogs. It became a real problem in my family. I collect stray dogs. Like if I find one, I will spend 3 hours trying to bring one back home. We had a little part in my garage for a little bit where my mom would keep cleaned, because she was like, yeah, you're gonna bring a dog, and we're gonna have a little section over here in case. So yes, dogs. Everyone should have a dog or a cat if you're more of a cat person. Either way,
right? It doesn't have to be such a world divided. Dog people, cat people. Yeah, we can all get along.
Your upcoming session at the Kaua'i Writers Conference, Laughter Through Tears, taps into the emotional blend you do so well in your novels. What are you most excited to share with writers in that class, and what do you hope they take away from it?
Yeah, I'm very excited, and I love this name, sort of Laughter Through Tears. It's almost cribbed a little bit from Steel Magnolias, the play, and then the brilliant movie. And Dolly Parton, I believe it's Dolly Parton's character, has this line that says, laughter through tears is my favorite emotion. And it's always been mine as well, and I'm going to go back to I'm going to switch over to movies for a second, because they were such early pop cultural touchstones. But I was telling someone that my favorite films were, like Terms of Endearment, or Steel Magnolias, as I mentioned, or Beaches. And these are my favorite comedies, I was telling someone. And they're like, comedies? You mean the one where, the daughter dies, the mother dies, or the best friend dies? And I was like, oh. Well, that's so funny, because I remember them in my head as life affirming. And I think it's because they all employ humor so well. And so what I'm really excited to talk about is, no matter what the story that you are writing and take place, that the addition of some humor and some levity is really it really has the opportunity to make your story resonate with a reader and become something that they remember, because it feels as well-rounded as life itself. And so we're going to talk about little ways to add humor, both big and small, and the different kinds of humor, and the different kinds of humor that we find in novels and in fiction writing. And it may be a character who's a curmudgeon. It may be a character like Patrick from The Guncle who has great one-liners, or that it could be a little bit of the absurd. But we're going to cover it all and find some great examples where it is really that humor in fiction writing has really resonated with us, and how it allows these stories to stay with us long after we've finished the final page.
Amazing. And I think we could all use humor in our daily life, in our novels, and in our movies. So I'm very excited to be a part of it. I'm going to be hopping around the conference. So I'll come in for a little bit, be like, hey, so you'll see me there. So I'm very excited to get to be a part of your class as well.
Well, fantastic. And whatever you miss, we'll discuss it in detail over on Mai Tai.
Perfect. Absolutely. I'm down for it. Well, thank you so much for taking this time with me today and for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to meet you in person at the conference.
I'll see you in Kauai.